The ships came quietly, their sails torn and their flags hanging like funeral cloths. It was October 1347 when 12 merchant vessels from the Black Sea drifted into the Sicilian port of Messina. The townsfolk gathered on the docks, expecting silk, spices, and stories from the east. Instead, they found death waiting in the hulls. The sailors lay sprawled across the decks, black sores bursting on their skin, their bodies twisted in agony. Those still alive screamed for water, for mercy, for God. Rats crawled over their limbs, their fur slick with filth. When the dock workers saw this horror, they tried to push the ships back out to sea, but it was too late. The wind carried the plague ashore long before the anchors were raised. No one knew it then, but this moment, a handful of ghost ships drifting into a sunlit harbor, would mark the beginning of the Black Death in Europe. The disease had already devoured Asia, riding along the trade routes of the Silk Road, but with merchants, fleas, and the breath of travelers. The people of Europe had no concept of contagion. They spoke of curses, of God's wrath, of poisoned air. But beneath the superstition lay the truth. The plague was a stowaway on every ship, hiding in the bellies of rats, in the fur of cats, and in the bite of a flea no bigger than a grain of dust. As these ships sailed from the east to Constantinople, from Constantinople to Genoa, from Genoa to Messina, they carried the seeds of apocalypse in their wooden bones. When the people of Messina began to die, the authorities ordered the ships to leave, but the vessels simply sailed north, spreading death to every port they touched. From Sicily to Marseille, from Pisa to Venice, the same silent invasion repeated itself. Priests stood at the harbors, praying for protection, but even they soon fell. Within weeks, Italy's trade routes became veins of infection, pulsing with the unstoppable flow of the dead and dying. Europe's lifeblood commerce had become its curse, and still the ships kept coming. Night after night, they arrived unannounced, drifting through the mist like ghosts. By the time the truth dawned, the continent was already infected. The plague had entered not with an army, but with a whisper, not with thunder, but with silence. The true invaders of Europe were not men, but creatures too small to notice. A flea, feeding on an infected rat in the port of Caffa, carried within it a bacterium Yersinia pestis. When that flea bit another host, the plague leaped forward like a spark in dry grass. No one in the 14th century understood this. They burned incense to purify the air, rang church bells to ward off evil, and quarantined ships without knowing why. Yet, through superstition and panic, some strange wisdom emerged. The Italian city of Ragusa, modern Dubrovnik, became the first to establish quarantino, 40 days of isolation for arriving ships. It was a desperate attempt to stop the invisible tide, but the sea was already contaminated. Rats infested every port, every alleyway, every granary. They slipped ashore through ropes and cargo holds, spreading the infection inland. Villages that had never seen a ship began to die from a disease born on the ocean. Messengers carried letters sealed with death. Merchants delivered goods laced with invisible killers. The world's most powerful trade network had turned against itself. In the great cities, Venice, Genoa, Florence, panic grew like wildfire. Ships once symbols of wealth and progress were now floating coffins. Harbor masters ordered vessels burned before they docked. Sailors were shot with arrows before they could disembark. Families along the coast lit bonfires, hoping the smoke would drive away the pestilence. But the plague was already inland, climbing mountains, crossing borders, carried by the very breath of the living. For the first time in history, humanity realized that death could travel, not on horseback, not on wind, but in silence. The same ships that had once connected the world now carried its undoing, and as Europe watched its ports darken and its cities crumble, the sea became a graveyard of empty ships drifting endlessly, their decks littered with bones, their sails whispering in the wind. They called them the silent ships. They brought not trade, not fortune, but the quietest invasion the world had ever known.